Welcome back to This Is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to be talking about Commander Tough Rules and Cool Interactions, episode 124. Today's episode is going to take a look at something that has existed in Magic for a very long time, but it has never been mentioned or actually directly referenced on a black border card until now with the new Thunder Junction set. The card that mentions this thing is Riku of Many Paths, and the thing that it mentions is a Modal Spell. And before I read exactly what Riku does, I figured I'd throw in a little Magic trivia. Pause the video if you'd like time to think about the answer to this little trivia question. What is the very first set in Magic to offer a Modal Spell? Of course, we'll be getting into exactly what a modal spell is later in this video, but it might surprise you that the very first set to offer a modal spell is actually the very first set in Magic the Gathering, which is of course the Alpha set, with the three cards Blue Elemental Blast, Healing Salve, and Red Elemental Blast. Okay, so Riku of Many Paths is a creature that says whenever you cast a modal spell, choose up to X, where X is the number of times you chose a mode for that spell, and then there are three other options for you to pick from. They're not all that relevant for this episode, as I'm here to focus on what is a modal spell that triggers Riku, and what things that look like they are, but actually are not modal spells. So let's get into it. Earlier, I showed you those three cards from the Alpha set that are indeed modal spells when cast, and then there's a couple other Magic's older sets that we got cards that began one of the largest and longest running cycles in Magic's history, and that would be the Charms. Cards like Chaos Charm from Mirage and Emerald Charm from Visions are just two examples of these charms. And if we look at a more recent printing of Emerald Charm, we can see that the card's formatting looks quite a bit different than its original printing. The Dominaria Remastered version here has the individual lines with bullet points. So this leads into the next thing I'll cover, which is what does the actual CR say about modal spells? And we can see that it defines this in CR 700.2, and it says that a spell or ability is modal if it has two or more options in a bulleted list preceded by instructions for a player to choose a number of those options, such as choose one. Each of those options is a mode. Modal cards printed prior to the Khans of Tarkir set did not use bulleted lists for the modes. These cards have received errata in the Oracle card reference, so the modes do appear in a bulleted list. So that defines actually what is a modal spell. So let's take a look at some other cards that are not these charms. There is an entire classification of cards called MDFCs, or modal double-faced cards. One of the most popular ones is seen here with Bala Ged Recovery and Bala Ged Sanctuary. The Bala Ged Recovery does not have any of those bulleted list items, but it is a modal double-faced card. So does that count towards Riku's trigger condition? Sadly, it does not. Despite modal literally being the name of the type of card that it is, Riku specifically triggers from casting a modal spell. But a modal card is different from a modal spell. While it is on the stack as a spell, Bala Ged Recovery is just a normal sorcery spell in the game's eyes, and not a modal spell. Now let's take a look at split cards like Assault and Battery, as well as fuse split cards like Give and Take. Despite you making a choice of which halves of the card that you'll be casting when you move it to the stack, split cards are not modal spells. Similarly, a card like Multiple Choice might look like it could be a modal spell, but despite its line breaks, they are not bulleted, and it is therefore not a modal spell. Finally, a couple of things that might be as confusing as the MDFC thing would be cards like Monastery Siege and Aether Channeler. We can see that both of these cards have the bulleted list on them, so you might think that they actually do count. And even if you hop onto Scryfall and you search with the is modal quality, these will show up in that list. But are they modal spells? Sadly, they are not. The Channeler does have a modal triggered ability, but that doesn't mean that the Channeler is a modal spell while it is on the stack. And Riku doesn't trigger from you activating or triggering modal abilities. Similarly, the Siege does have a mode that you must choose, but that is as it is entering the battlefield, and that means that it is now resolved and no longer a spell still on the stack. You do not choose cons or dragons while it is still an enchantment spell that is still on the stack. So, are there any other weird cards that you all can think of that might possibly be a modal spell that could be mistaken as something that would trigger Riku? Are you surprised that it has taken this many years for WotC to finally print a black-bordered card that references a modal spell? Actually, you know what? I guess I have a secret bonus question for all of you that have made it this far. The new Spree cards that were also just released in this Thunder Junction set. Cards like Smuggler's Surprise. Would this card be considered a modal spell when you cast it? Hopefully that's a good a little bonus question for you guys. Yeah. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you have even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta!